So, if you're following along with some of this reform nonsense, or if you are just joining in on this, following along with this, there are a couple of key dates you probably want to, keep in your diaries and watch out for. First of all, for some of these councils, is going to be LGR, that's local government reform. That is all going to kick off in November, right? That's going to be a big one. Do they have these councils actually submitted a plan? Are, shall we say, as we have seen in the case of Nottingham or Nottinghamshire, do some of their own councillors actually agree? And then also all of a sudden might find themselves moved on to a completely different council, meaning that in some cases where they were already in a minority government, they are now even in a bigger minority. Not only that, they could even find themselves in some of these situations with some of these councillors actually losing their seats. So that's going to be fun when they start fighting about all that. However, the big one, of course, is budgets, because they are now 5 months away, which is not a long time, to actually start to put together a budget. And remember, they can't just wait until February to say, here's the budget, vote on it, please. Oh no, they have to put this out in December so that this can then be assessed by other councillors. Now, will they meet that deadline, first of all, as we've seen in Leicestershire? And we are going to be watching the scrutiny committee meeting of Leicestershire where they discuss that, because that is, I suspect, going to be quite interesting. So check in on that and give that a watch if you do. I have a sneaking suspicion it's going to be quite fun when we watch it. However, what then they do? Because remember, Reform made some big promises, big promises. And they are the ones in control. They will complain that this isn't their fault, that they were left holding the bathwater, etc. But here's the thing. They are the now ones in charge. They are the ones who said, put us in charge. We are like far better than this absolute terrible lot that are in already. We'll come in, we'll sort it all out, we'll hit the ground running, we'll make efficiency savings, and we'll cut all this terrible waste that all these councils are, wasting all your money on, like this DEI stuff, which again has been non-existent. So we're going to have a look at Durham, because Durham is also one of these councils that is in a lot of trouble when it comes to their finances. And remember, whereas things like Leicestershire, Nottinghamshire, a couple of the councils that we've covered, they're not in a majority, they're in a minority. So at least they can, try and pass the blame onto others. However, in places like Durham and Kent, they are in the majority. They are the ones in full control here. So if it all goes wrong, it's all on them. They are the ones that are going to make these decisions. And they are the ones that are going to be the ones blamed for their decisions at these budgets, because, oh boy, I think we are in for some very interesting times ahead on some of these councils, that's for sure. So before we go diving into this, please do, of course, remember to click on the like, share, and, of course, subscribe button down below. Of course, there is the bell button where you can ring that. You get notifications of when we go live or when we drop a new video. And, of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page, the one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee. We can well buy me coffee, the YouTube thank you button. And, of course, as always, there's the Pony Club down below as well. So let's crack on then into this, because, oh boy, I think Durham, and especially Darren Grimes, might not be having the best time soon. So over we go to the Northeast bylines covering this. So the £71 million black hole in Durham County Council's finances. Not good at all. So less than 5 months after coming to power, Durham's Reform UK controlled county council now finds itself facing a £71 million black hole by the end of this decade with just 5 months to decide how to fill it. 5 months. And you would have thought, bear in mind, you'd have a plan, that you would do something by this point. But of course, no. And I've always said, look at the polls now. How do you think happens if somewhere like Durham suddenly goes bankrupt or one of these reform councils goes bankrupt? Do you think that's not going to affect the polls? I will tell you now, if I were any other political party, I would be constantly highlighting all this crazy stuff that's going on these councils and constantly bringing it up. If I were a reporter and had chance to sit in front of like Farage or anything, I'd be bringing all this stuff up and saying, you said you'd be better. You said you'd be doing this. Well, look at this. Look at this. How do you explain this? What do you mean going on here? Just highlight just how bad they are. But anyway, back onto this. So, the party, of course, which took over control in the council back in May, pledged to cut waste and keep council tax as low as possible. And they have now set out its medium-term financial plan for 2026 to 2037 to the 29 to 2030 by January. And then, of course, fix the level of council tax for the 26 to 27 by February. So, as always, this is going to be interesting. And this might be a scrutiny meeting we might have to see very soon. I will have to check in on when the next scrutiny meeting for Durham comes in, because it could be very interesting indeed. So, if no council tax increases are imposed, no cuts agreed, no reserves used, the authority will be in the red by 20 million by the 26-27 and 16.9 million in by 27-29, 19.9 million by 28-29, and 14 million in by 29-30. This would total a 71 million pound over the 4-year midterm financial period gap. How are they going to cover this? What are they going to do? Anyway, this, of course, compares with the 45.8 million now in the remaining 3 years of the previous midterm funding plan, agreed, of course, by the council's previous administration. That, of course, plan ends in 28 and 29, and an assumed 2.9% annual council tax rises, comparing with, of course, the like, excluding now the fourth new midterm financial plan, assuming that zero council tax rises, and of course a new government, the fair funding formula, is updated now to forecast a shortfall for all 3 years of the 26, the 27, the 28, and 29, and increased by £11.1 million. With, of course, out a council tax increase, the council will now have to find savings of £56 million over the coming 3-year period. Even rises of the 5% maximum allowed, it will then have to find £11.3 million over that very same period. There is now a report next week into the Cabinet's new meeting by Paul Darby, the Corporate Director of Resources, and Councillor Darren Grimes, the council's deputy head of finance lead. Jesus Christ. Darren Grimes is in charge of this. Oh, God. I'd forgotten he was that. Yeah, because you've got to remember, Darren Grimes is like triple rolling. He's deputy leader, he's in charge of the finances, and he's in charge of comms. I think next week's cabinet meeting might be fun. I think next week's cabinet meeting might be incredibly fun. So we might even have to tune in and watch that and see what happens there. Anyway, the council currently has reserves of 34.5 million, but Darby and Grimes' report warns that it will not be financially sustainable to place an over-reliance on the use of these reserves to actually balance the council's financial position across the midterm financial planning period, and the application now of this reserve should only be considered now a short-term fix while the more sustainable solutions are then developed. For context, any spending reductions to come will follow £288 million worth of cuts already made by the council over the past 16 years. Durham's total budget this year is 621 million pounds. So for this new council now, it very clearly, very clearly indeed, faces tough choices on how to balance a tax increase, cuts in services, and then its use of its own limited reserves. The very difficult process will, of course, start at the cabinet meeting on County Hall on the 17th of September, though none of the main decisions is expected on that occasion. This will, of course, start being made by the cabinet on the 19th of November, and then to be finalized in January and February. So this week on the 17th, start your clocks. Next Wednesday, we could be doing a watch of what goes on in this meeting. It could be pretty fun to watch what happens here. Well, honestly, as this continues, to be honest, let's face it. The top officials have, of course, stated that working on options now with senior councillors means more job losses on top of over the 72 over the next 3 years that have already not been, of course, ruled out. Darby and Grimes, of course, does warn on the onset that the council's midterm financial position does remain challenging and at this stage uncertain. The government, of course, is basing its own financial planning calculations, including its funding for councils, on the assumptions that all councils will now raise council tax by 5 to 3%. Core council tax is currently at 2% for adult social care. Durham, of course, is among the councils most likely to benefit from a proposed redistribution of funding allocations for local government, the so-called Fair Funding Review 2.0, the first major challenge now to local government formulas since 2020. 2013 and 2014, described, of course, in the Darby Grimes report as now long overdue. But Durham may have to pay some of its extra money back to help ease the hit to the councils that will now be the losers under this FFR 2.0. There is, of course, still no sign that Reform UK intends now to drive a coach and horses through the normal government financial rules, saying that the new leadership of the council recognised the importance now of setting now a balanced and sustainable budget, says the Darby Grimes report. The post-local elections in now May 2025, the focus has been on seeking out efficiencies and reviewing contracts with a clear focus on ensuring that council services now value for money. But here's the thing, you can only go so far on this because they came in under the assumption that there's all this waste and inefficiencies going on, and that once they get in, they'll just see all this stuff and they can clear all that up. I can guarantee you now, they will make nothing. Sure, I think they'll be able to find some stuff, but it's not going to be like life changing. It's not going to change their position. As in Leicestershire, you've got the guy currently doing they paid for an outside audit to be done, and the guy is literally pinning his entire hopes, Dan Harrison, on the hopes that somehow that will come back and find all this secret money that's been squirreled away for Leicestershire. Anyway, back to this. He said the cabinet have, of course, expressed a desire to ideally not increase council tax. Where, of course, this is unavoidable, the limit increase will be as far as possible. The council have asked officers to consider a range of options in terms of increases to council tax, but they've been very clear that they wish to ensure that council tax increases are kept at an absolute minimum throughout the midterm financial period, as the cabinet seeks to now drive further improvements of ways delivering services to reduce costs and improve efficiencies. They won't find anything. That drive will be meaningless. They will have to raise council tax. And remember, they've in Durham at the moment, they've already moved a provision where people who couldn't afford to pay the full council tax were, at least subsidized in that way, so they didn't have to pay full council tax. They've taken that away now. They are going to be put in a position where they will have to increase council tax. They're basically going to run into a wall. They're going to have to do it. And remember, this is, of course, a party that says, oh, no, we don't want to increase council tax. We want to lower it. Anyway, The Darby Grimes, of course, report does continue to include a very pointed reminder to the cabinet about equality, bearing in mind what Reform UK Nigel Farage leader said in May after his party's Durham election victory in a speech at Newton Attercliffe, where Farage advised anyone working on climate change or diversity, equality, inclusion initiatives to now be seeking alternative careers very, very quickly. So that, as we've said before, I think that could be challenged legally. If someone gets fired from Durham and they are in one of those jobs, I think that might be actionable. I'm not a lawyer in that area, but it seems to me that might be actionable. And those words could come back to haunt, Reform UK. And then what does Durham do? Where it now has all these dispute claims against it, and it's having to pay those out. Remember, why did Birmingham go bankrupt? It was because it had all those unequal pay disputes that it was having to sort out. What happens then if that happens to Durham as well? Because of something that Nigel Farage said about this. It's very interesting in this one. But of course, the Darby Grimes report does, of course, remind the cabinet in some detail now of its duties under the Equality Act of 2010 to ensure that, of course, it avoids any unlawful discrimination in its midterm financial decisions, saying that several successful judicial reviews have reinforced the need now for a robust consideration of the public sector equality duty and the impact on protected characteristics in the decision-making process. It warns members will need to take full account of the duty and accompanying evidence when considering multiple midterm financial proposals. So they know, or at least it's warning its members there, that they cannot go crazy and just start firing people. And I think those words, you know, to those people doing those things, seeking alternative careers very, very quickly, I think those words are going to come back to haunt them. I absolutely think those are. I think Farage has put a lot of reform councils in a very difficult position saying that. So back to this. Reform UK is, of course, not responsible for the budget position it, of course, finds itself in today, which it inherited when it took control of Durham County Council, of course, on May. But it will now be accountable for all the tough decisions it will have to make between now and, of course, February. Reform is now about to find out that running a big council with a budget of over £600 million, with service pressure on services like social care, which must be statutory provided with strict limited resources, is not easy. It will be now interesting to see how it then copes and perhaps become very distressing for some Durham residents. I think they are in trouble. I think a lot of these reform councils are in trouble. They went in with crazy ideas that there's all this waste and inefficiency going on at the councils, and that once they arrive, they'll be able to see all this waste and inefficiency, and they're able to just cut all this away. And oh my god, they've solved all these problems. Not how it's going. It's not how it's going at all. It's going very, very badly, honestly. Very, very badly for them consistently, every single time. So, as always, let me know how you think this is going to go, because I think, as I've said before, if one of these reform councils goes bankrupt, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, are we in for some fun if that happens? If you live in one of those areas, granted, it could be very bad. I agree with you on that one, but this is why you need, people who know what they're doing in these positions and, have done this maybe type of thing before or are experienced in these types of scenarios. And of course, still at the moment, the Doggle unit down in Kent still not reported, at least yet. Maybe we'll hear something this week. Who knows? But until we do, we'll see you all, of course, next time.